What's good, ladies and gentlemen? So, welcome to another SK Wealth Academy podcast. And this one, I can already tell you, is going to be quite long. So, if you're listening to this in the morning, go grab your cup of coffee. If you're listening to this at night, go grab your glass of Don Julio Patron and settle in. Because in this podcast, I urge you to go check it out on YouTube, because I will have a list of numerous links to information I'm going to reference in this podcast that will enable you to go verify the information about which I speak for yourself, which I always encourage you to do. I always encourage you never to blindly believe anything that I spout as fact, but go confirm it for yourself. And then also I'll provide a timeline of the podcast topics for those of you that wish to just skip to certain sections that interest you the most. Although I do believe, in my opinion, that this podcast is one of the most important podcasts I've released in the past several months. So I do hope you stick around for the entire duration. So I'm going to begin this podcast by just emphasizing the fact that I urge everyone to give in to love, because love causes us to speak out, to stand up for truth and what is right, to be courageous, honorable, to treat all equally and with dignity, to exercise our morals and principles, while fear does the exact opposite. And I say this because, with this global pandemic lockdown, we are all being conditioned to respond to fear instead of love. So since I've been doing this podcast, and please remember or note that if you are new to this podcast channel and see, oh, you haven't been at this game for too long, that is incorrect, because on my old YouTube channel that Google effectively shut down through relentless demonetization and shadow banning of every single video I uploaded within minutes of uploading it, there are 270 podcasts I uploaded to my old channel. So I've been at this podcast game for more than a decade. And in that decade of time, I've met dozens of people from all over the world that have informed me that they listen to dozens and dozens of my videos, or view dozens of my videos. And that would include people from Spain, from Greece, from Argentina, Brazil, Portugal, Canada, Russia, Croatia, Tanzania, South Africa, Germany, Brazil, and many, many other nations. But perhaps what was most enlightening and revealing to me is that dozens from those nations taught me that they never commented on many of the dozens of videos they viewed. And when I asked them why, they said, well, they had read that Google, who is the owner of YouTube, would track all people that made certain comments that did not fit in with the official narrative of the topic about which I spoke in my videos, and they did not want to be tracked by Google. So in other words, they gave into fear instead of love. And a prime example of that kind of enforcement of fear that's going on today is that YouTube/Google has stated they will automatically censor any video with any narratives that contest the narratives forwarded by officials from a certain global health organization, which I presume you'll be able to easily figure out what organization I'm talking about. And even in light of that edict, they never bothered to inform us that many of the narratives are being forwarded by an organization that is not even headed by a medical doctor. And in fact, the head of this particular global health organization is a former government cabinet minister of an African nation who holds a doctorate of philosophy in community health, although he does also hold a Master of Science, which is more related in immunology of infectious diseases. However, his academic background would make him about as equally qualified as myself to head up this organization. Of course, I'm not qualified to do so. Now, let me move on to the biggest trick the powers that be have played on us. So to live a life of fear is to not live at all, in my opinion. Imagine if everyone operated out of love instead of fear. What if everyone spoke their mind, unafraid of the consequences of Big Brother, and instead of perhaps the 1 to 2% that do so right now in our modern world, we would force Big Brother to have to track and surveil all 7.8 billion of us, because we all spoke our minds. We did not engage in self-censorship. So instead of having to track just 1 to 2% of us, they had to track 7.8 billion of us. If this happened, their surveillance programs would effectively be reduced to looking for a needle in a haystack instead of just combing through a small percentage of their current surveillance data. So for this reason, I will continue to assert that we have a lot of untapped, unrealized power through the strength of exercise, community, and numbers that we basically refuse to exercise today. So the biggest trick the devils that rule the world played on us is convincing us we have no power, when such a belief is patently false, because that's what I constantly keep hearing. We don't have any power to fight back. If we do so, we'll be crushed. That is not true. In fact, in SK Wealth Academy podcast number 85, I spoke about the relationship between the political, central banking, military, industrial machine, and us, and how they are the parasites and we are the hosts. And I also pose this super important question: who is more powerful in a parasitic relationship, the parasite or the host? And the answer to this question depends on who shows greater strength and greater courage in this relationship. Because if the host displays greater strength and courage and expels the parasite becomes weak and dies. However, if the host cowers and takes zero action, remains silent and immobile as the parasite feeds off of us, even though the parasite will always, 100% of the time, be the weaker party in this relationship from the jump, the parasite eventually will become stronger than us by draining us of all our life energy, and though tiny in size in comparison to the host, which is true today, they number in the few thousands while we are in the billions. They eventually will succeed in sucking the entire life force out of us and end up killing us, the host. Therefore, it is entirely up to us, the host, to decide if we live or die in our parasitic/host relationship that we have with the powers that be. So like I said, over the past decade, I consistently hear this message from people that say, oh, I want to break free of this relationship, but we're powerless to do anything about it. And this is exactly what the powers that be want us to falsely believe. In fact, I've often stated, even when it comes to subject as daunting as the global monetary system we use, the ultimate power in the form of money we accept as payment for goods and services lies not with central bankers, as 99% plus people in this world mistakenly believe, but it lies with us. And we even have historical precedents to prove this. In every instance in which fiat currencies collapsed into worthlessness, whether with the first Chinese paper currencies issued thousands of years ago, or with German marks during the Weimar Republic, the Zimbabwe dollar, the Venezuelan Bolivar Fuerte, or the Ukrainian hryvnia. In more modern times, right? These examples are more modern times. The ultimate collapse of these paper currencies into worthlessness was not ushered in by decision of central bankers, but ushered in by decision of the people to outright reject acceptance of any of the domestic currency and widespread circulation as payment for their goods and services. So though central banker excess in creating massive volumes of the national fiat currency obviously was responsible for pushing the paper currency to the brink of collapse, only the people's decision to outright reject acceptance of the currency pushed it from the brink of collapse into utter collapse and worthlessness. So ultimately, only the people, not the central bankers, wield the power to collapse the fiat currency system in use in all nations around the world. And this should be clear from the collapse of every fiat currency in the global monetary system in the history of money. Yet, despite this overwhelming evidence, we still believe we are powerless about our options of monetary use, and that we must bow down to central bankers' decisions that are made with zero input from us, the citizens of planet Earth. So to escape this false belief, we must first recognize that the con game that takes place in the global banking and financial system is strong. And the con game executed by central bankers is exceeded by no other persons or institutions on this planet. So I'm recording this podcast on May 3rd, but I might not actually upload it until about May 10th because I have 2 more pre-recorded podcasts to upload before this one. But during April of 2020, US central bankers conned people into spending billions to buy corporate bonds by using their propaganda arm, the mass media, to report that they were buying all types of US corporate bonds, including even junk bonds. So I'm not speculating that this happened. I'm not, just pulling this information out of the hat. This actually happened. The media actually reported something as fact before it actually happened. So on April 9th, again, you can find all the links in the show notes to this podcast on the YouTube upload on my channel, SK Wealth Academy podcast. So on the 9th of April, Bloomberg ran a headline that blared Fed to buy junk bonds as a fact. And in response, confident that they had a Fed put on higher bond prices, buyers loaded up on US corporate bonds, including buying $25 billion worth of corporate bonds at one of the worst companies out there, Boeing. And this is a company I told my patrons to short twice for huge gains before the viral pandemic hit. So Boeing was a terrible company even before airlines were massively negatively impacted by the government pandemic lockdown on air travel. So, but on May 1st, it was revealed that US central bankers had not bought one single corporate bond yet, though they had promised to buy, I believe it was hundreds of millions of corporate bonds. That was their promise. And I believe it was hundreds, not tens. But you can go look at the links I'll post and we'll have the figures there of how much they said they were going to purchase. And they may eventually actually do so. Because remember, I'm recording this on May 3rd. They have not done it yet. They haven't even bought one. But they spurred a mass speculation of corporate bond buying that numbered in the billions and billions of dollars. So again, the fact that the mass media reported something that had not yet happened as a fact should again clue us into who really controls the mass media. The powers that be have conned us since the day we stepped foot into school as grade schoolers, constantly herding us like cattle to be slaughtered into their factory farms for everything that destroy our curiosity, our creativity, our individuality, and our physical and mental health. So from the time we are born, we are herded into factory schooling. We eat factory farm foods. We graduate into working for career factory farms known as the corporate plantation. And then we finally retire in our 60s if we are lucky, because with the massive financial global market meltdown that is coming, phase 2, many of us won't be able to retire until we're 70 or 80 years old if we live that long. We perhaps only exercise free thought from the time we retire until the time we die. So we constantly react as if we are playing checkers with the powers that be, but they've clearly proven that they're playing a game of chess with us. So next I want to discuss how important it is to be mindful of your consumption pattern. And I would say we need to be mindful of our consumption pattern. And I can't stress this enough, as so few of us today, actually hold on one second, because I want to grab a pen so I can write down these particular points, which I can write down as the series for the podcast timeline of topics. So hold on one second. Okay, I'm back and have grabbed it. So this happens at the 13:40 minute mark, and consumption patterns. Okay, so I can't stress enough the importance of paying attention to things we consume on a daily basis. That doesn't mean everything we consume, not just food, but also information, music, and entertainment, the air we breathe, the smells we inhale, everything. So I love the analogy of junk food consumption to our health. So let me preface this portion of my podcast by stating that I'm co-opting this junk food analogy from author and journalist Johann Hari, who I'll also put a link to his website in the show notes below. So Mr. Hari stated that we all understand that if we consume our daily diet at Jack in the Box, McDonald's, Kentucky Fried Chicken, and so on, that our subsequent poor health will be reflective of our junk food diet. However, he consequently stated that the vast majority of us fail to extend the importance of our diet to the very values that guide our lives. And that if we have junk food values and value money over relationships, we value material goods over spiritual and mental health, then we are bound to suffer from high rates of depression, stress, and anxiety. So I love that analogy. I believe we can extend Mr. Hari's brilliant analogy to all patterns of consumption as well. So if we pursue junk food education through the institutional academic system and engage in no self-education, then our critical thinking skills will also exist at junk food level. If we breathe in toxic junk air into our lungs when we develop respiratory problems and bronchitis, we should not be surprised. If we ingest junk food, music, and entertainment, and then become vessels for forwarding the state message, like quote-unquote activist Baratunde Thurston, then we should not be surprised, because in the video that I'm going to link again in the show notes of my YouTube podcast upload, Mr. Thurston aggressively pushes the state surveillance agenda by ignorantly stating that those that are calling for an end to the lockdown in early May are quote-unquote endangering the health of the elderly. And he heaps lavish praise upon these totalitarian state monitoring and surveillance methodology, like Taiwan's monitoring of every citizen by forcing every citizen to pass through checkpoints and provide QR codes that inform them if they have been infected with the virus or are so-called clean people that are free to move about the nation without any repercussions. He said this is a great solution the U.S. should be deploying, and he's not realizing his ignorance and forwarding Orwellian-like prison agendas of the state and saving the state of the trouble of having to brainwash the constituents to whom Thurston appeals. And as a black person, he probably appeals to people of color the most. So ironically, Thurston does not realize that it is his ignorance of the science behind the pandemic that leads to his ignorant berating of those that understand a blanket lockdown is unnecessary to stop the spread of the virus, and that a segmented strategy that does not require a blanketed lockdown that would allow those that need to work to survive, as there are hundreds of millions of people all over the world in that situation, that this solution would be an infinitely more effective strategy while also minimizing damage to people's financial lives and to their physical health as well. So further, with greater irony in his video, Thurston is rocking a snapback that says hashtag schools not prison, which further reveals his lack of understanding of the empire of illusion, in which schools today are far more concerned with conditioning children and young adults to be socially and behaviorally obedient to the narrative of authority without any critical exposition, of which he is a prime example, than they are with educating and fostering great thinkers. And in fact, for those that are interested in learning more about this topic, the empire of illusion, I uploaded a 5-part series about this very topic on my old, now defunct YouTube channel. Being defunct is in that I haven't uploaded any new fresh content in years, although you can still find it on YouTube. So I'll put the links in the show notes below, because in those parts, part 1, I discuss unsound versus sound money. Part 2, I discuss the fake academic system. Part 3, I discuss the delusional world of fine art, music, and politics. Part 4, I discuss reasons why we succumb to illusion, even when truth stares us in the face. And part 5 was titled The Truth Will Set You Free. So if you want to listen to any of those podcasts, you can go find the links in the YouTube show notes. However, if you watch any of these videos, please do not subscribe to that channel because I'm not uploading any fresh content. So please subscribe to this one. Okay, so let's continue. Continuing with my theme that junk food consumption leads to junk food beliefs. Most of us in our entertainment consumption employ woeful, and I really do mean woeful filters to the things we consume that are toxic to our mind and toxic to our spirit. And worse than even junk food consumption, most of our entertainment patterns revolve around toxic consumption. So I remember many years ago, like I asked one of my friends if he had ever seen the Japanese movie Battle Royale, which is a cult classic. And at this time, it was a long time ago. My friend was, I believe, around 23 years old, and I was older than him at the time, but still he dispensed some knowledge and wisdom to me and told me that I shouldn't watch, in his words, quote, those kinds of movies. So if you've never heard of Battle Royale, to sum up its premise in a nutshell, it's like a more violent version of Lord of the Flies or the Hunger Games, where Japanese school children isolated on an island are forced to kill one another to survive. So at the time, though I've never in my life been a horror film buff, I didn't understand his words. I didn't understand because he didn't really explain. He just said, you shouldn't watch those kinds of movies. And only years later did I understand what he meant by that. Because I thought back then, watching such content, because I knew it to be fiction, and because I certainly did subscribe to a ridiculous premise that children should be forced to kill one another to survive as entertainment, I believed, since I knew it was a movie, I knew it was just entertainment, that was completely harmless. And I thought it was simply a harmless horror movie. And it wasn't, again, like I said, till years later that I understood my friend's advice of why watching such content is not harmless. So big up to my friend Shin Koyamada for understanding the perils of toxic entertainment consumption even in his early 20s and schooling me, who was someone older than him at the time. And, well, not obviously, I'm still older than him today, but I mean, his insight in his early 20s was far beyond his biological age. So in any event, much of Hollywood is pure propaganda. The consumers of it do not even realize it. As another example, let me present to you Zero Dark 30. That's a film about the capture and killing of Osama bin Laden that was prefaced with, before the movie started, that was based on a true story claim. So after watching it, I immediately knew that much of that movie was entirely fabricated, because just common sense from things that did not make any sense to me, allowed me, using my critical thinking skills and my brain, to speculate that much of that movie was entirely fabricated. However, only after I researched its production further did I discover that the CIA had final script approval for that film. Meaning, for those of you that don't understand what final script approval means, is that they had to read the entire script, that they censored portions of it they did not like, and added and modified additional scenes to paint the exact narrative they wished every consumer of the film to believe. So later, in having a conversation with a friend of mine that loved that film much more than myself and described it as awesome, I responded, "You do know that about half that film was complete fiction, right?" And to that, he responded, "What do you mean? That was a real event that actually happened." And I responded by asking him the following, or presenting to him the following scenario. I said, if the CIA relayed a story about a crashed plane registered to their agency in the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico that was on the way to the United States from South America, containing between 3 and 6 tons of cocaine, but denied any involvement in the drug smuggling operation because they rebutted the fact that the plane belonged to them, even though it was registered to them, by saying they had sold the plane years ago, but yet provided no hard evidence of doing so. Would you believe their quote-unquote official story? My friend responded with a very robustly expressed hell no. So, by the way, I revealed to him that that story I told to him was not hypothetical, but a real event that happened in September of 2016, which you can, again, read about if you go to the show notes of this podcast. And initial stories actually had reported that in addition to the 3 to 6 tons of cocaine, that several tons of heroin were also on board. Only later, the story was redacted to omit earlier claims of the presence of several tons of heroin. And though it doesn't seem feasible, right, that a reporter can mistakenly report the presence of several tons of heroin, because one would not think a reporter would make such a claim without actually directly witnessing and viewing that cargo himself, because there are plenty of photos online of the several tons of cocaine, right, that were just laid out after it was seized. So for some reason, photos of the seized heroin do not exist as far as I could tell, or maybe Google entirely scrubbed them and they initially existed back then. But those claims were made by reporters that said they viewed those several tons of heroin as well. But later it was story was corrected in air quotes and later reported to be a mistake. So expectedly, CIA denied still owning a plane, and but documents that would support any type of title transfer of the plane, like when you sell your car, you're American citizen, you have to report the sale of your car to the DMV. So if anything happens, like any type of criminal activity happens with that car, that you are not going to be hunted down as the owner of that car, you have to show some title transfer. And the CIA presented these documents, but they're completely shady, and there were many problems with the title transfer documents that they presented. So in any event, I consequently responded by asking my friend if he would not believe what seemed to be a fabricated denial about smuggling tons of cocaine and tons of heroin into the United States from South America, then why would he believe an equally implausible CIA fairy tale about the Osama bin Laden operation presented through the medium of film called Zero Dark 30? And then when he asked what I meant, I said, that's when I revealed to him, because he had no knowledge, that the CIA had final script approval over the entire production of that film. And to the revelation of this knowledge, he responded, but yeah, that doesn't mean they fictionalized the story. That could have meant they just wanted to ensure that the story was told as accurately as possible. So of course, such a reply more often than not happens in conversations like the one I had with my friend, is people want to believe what they want to believe, even when information that completely disputes and destroys our view is very robust. So in regard to our entertainment consumption, let me just conclude this segment of the podcast that with the warning that we should also take great care in the music that we consume and in the music videos we watch. If you're among someone that is like an audiophile and loves music like me, I don't really watch music videos, but there is a lot of programming that happens through the biggest pop stars' music and music videos. And this programming happens at a very high level today. One of the biggest songs of the past decade, although it's almost a decade old now, was the Eminem-Rihanna collaboration titled I Love the Way You Lie. And that video currently has nearly 2 billion views on YouTube. So to grant that number some perspective, Gangnam Style became the most watched video ever about 8 years ago in November 2012. And at that time, it reached 808 million views. So right now, I Love the Way You Lie has twice as many views, more than twice as many views as Gangnam Style did at the time it became the most watched video ever in YouTube history. And I believe like Despacito has now displaced that, and I think it has, 6 or 7 billion views. But it just shows you how many times that video was viewed. And among the lyrics are the following: just going to stand there and watch me burn. Well, that's all right because I love the way it hurts. Just going to stand there and hear me cry. Well, that's all right because I love the way you lie. I love the way you lie. End quote. And other lyrics include, she effing hates me and I love it. And if she ever tries to effing leave again, I'm gonna tie her to the bed and set this house on fire. Now, I know many will think I'm insane for saying we should be mindful about what songs we listen to and what lyrics we sing. But hundreds of millions of teenagers around the world sang those lyrics about their love of lies, their love of being hated, their love of being mistreated, and possibly even murdered. And believe that repeating such lyrics over and over and over and over again, because you know some teenagers listen to that song like 100 times, right? They believe they can listen to those types of lyrics and have those lyrics inflict no harm upon their psyche. So if you're among those that don't believe the repetition of negative words over and over and over again has no negative impact upon your psychology and does not subtly change the way you think about such topics, then you don't understand much about how programming works. You know, how psychological programming works today. So if you heard, for example, if you heard those words just in a simple conversation instead of a song, right? Someone told you, hey, I love the way that guy lies to me all the time. You know, most people would immediately respond to that negative energy right away and try to walk away from such a conversation because they don't want to expose themselves with, expose their psychological state to a negative person that's going to drain your energy. You know, like there's people we call negative Nancy's. Nobody likes being around negative Nancy's, right? But disguise that exact same highly negative message in a song with a good melody, then everyone's fine with their friends or kids singing those exact same words that we would outright reject were not in lyrical form. So just beware of the music you consume because we already receive enough junk in the news we consume that we believe to be factual. For example, in 2014, the editor of one of the largest German newspapers, Udo Aufkalte, gave a teary confession that the CIA had paid him, I think it was like for well over a decade, because I think he was the editor of this paper for a long time. But again, you can find all the facts in the link that I will provide in the show notes. And he also mentioned other editors of large papers in Britain, France, where else? He was the editor of the German newspaper, Australia, New Zealand, also planted fake stories and promoted them as facts in their newspapers. He stated, quote, I've been a journalist for about 25 years, and I've been educated to lie, to betray, and not to tell the truth to the public. I was supported by the Central Intelligence Agency, the CIA. Why? Because I am pro-American. The German and American media tries to bring war to the people in Europe, to bring war to Russia. This is a point of no return, and I am going to stand up and say, it is not right what I have done in the past to manipulate people to make propaganda against Russia. End quote. Furthermore, he outed most American and European media journalists as, quote, non-official cover, end quote. If you don't know what that means in alphabet agency terms, it means they have ties with alphabet intelligence agencies. And he went on to state he was not fearful of angering these alphabet agencies by exposing them because he did not have any children to whom he needed to provide care. But unfortunately, just a few years later after revealing those truths, he died of a heart attack. Now, some people speculate he was killed by intelligence agencies, and some people said he just died of a heart attack. So no one really knows, right, the real answer. But I would highly encourage you to go watch the video because it is a very tearful confession. So unless this guy is a great actor, he seems very credible in the fact that he seemed super, super regretful for what he had done. And lastly, if you believe that facts are merely gathered, not learned from the facts that are gathered, not learned from U.S. media are all facts, then you need to filter this belief through the lens of another video I'm going to post in the show notes, in which, again, I urge you to go watch, in which dozens of news anchors repeat the exact same words, and I'm not exaggerating, word for word, an exact same script that is condemning quote-unquote fake news, which grants credence to Mr. Aufkalte's claim about many U.S. journalists being agents of intelligence agencies and controlled like puppets as far as the narratives that they forward. So, yet, I guarantee that the vast majority of us have never thought about where our beliefs originate. So, sorry, I'm just writing down again the time of this. Original beliefs. Okay, so if you've never seriously researched your beliefs, this means that most likely You adopted instead of learned your beliefs. So the only beliefs you should ever defend are beliefs you learned, not adopted. Because there is a massive distinction between beliefs you have learned and beliefs you adopted. And one of the courses that I'm going to offer in my upcoming launch of my online SK Wealth Academy is an exercise. Like in my course, I offer this exercise that will prove that most of us have never undergone the process of formulating our own beliefs, but have merely accepted as fact beliefs that were shoved down our throats. So in other words, many of the beliefs we strongly embrace, we've never even vetted through the entirety of our lives, but we merely embrace them because someone taught us, hey, these are the facts, believe them. So I believe that every single person that takes this course about critical thinking will be shocked after completing my aforementioned course and exercise, because this exercise will force many people to confront the realization that we have blindly accepted things we were taught to believe for the majority of our lives without ever doing any of the legwork necessary to ascertain whether or not our beliefs that we accept as facts were actually true. So the problem is, because this process starts at such a young age, that small lies grow into bigger lies as we progress through the schooling system. So let me just give you a really quick and easy example that everyone will be able to understand, and that's probably happened to you as well in school. For when I was a grade schooler in school, I think this happened, I don't know, maybe at age 7 or 8 years old. You know, when you're told to color certain pictures and color them with crayons in the proper colors, they were always taught, hey, color the sky blue and the sun yellow, because that's what color they are. We were told the sun is yellow, the sky is blue. And then we blindly believe our grade school teachers because, you know, we trust our teachers are telling us facts. So only later, when I was older and much older, did I actually learn the sun is white and the sky is clear. But the sun's rays, because it consists of all the colors of the rainbow, that it appears yellow to us most of the time, because that is the type of color from all the sun's rays that are most heavily scattered through the Earth's atmosphere. And the same goes with the sky. The sky respectively scatters blue as the most common color, and it makes them appear yellow and blue most of the time. However, had I just exercised any bit of common sense, and you can't say that as a child that's 7 or 8 years old, you shouldn't be exercising common sense, because if you are taught common sense and critical thinking from that age, you should be exercising common sense even at 7 and 8. Just by exercising common sense, all of us could have realized that it's not a fact the sun is yellow and the sky is blue, because when we look at sunsets and sunrises, which all of us have seen by the time we're 6, 7, 8 years old, we would have seen the sun change colors from yellow to fiery oranges, deep reds, Bahamian pink, and the sky do exactly the same. Even see the sky like reflect purple colors from time to time. And that has to do with the fact that the Earth's atmosphere is refracting and reflecting and scattering these different colors because it's clear. So later in graduate school, as well, because I say the lies increase the more we progress through school, I learned that nearly everything my professors taught me about money, banking, and how pricing mechanisms work in global financial markets was completely wrong as well. And that's one of the reasons I developed my SK Wealth Academy and spent 10 years of my life devoted to that, and in like 5 to 10 years before that, just doing all the research. So really, the road has been 15 to 20 years long for me to release my SK Wealth Academy, because I wanted to inform people of financial market reality that's completely withheld from every school in the world at the current time. So we're constantly lied to all the time. Even in the course of my martial arts progression or career or whatever training, I guess is the best word, I explored many different styles. So I studied Kyokushinkai Karate, Jiu-Jitsu, Aki-Jitsu, Northern Shaolin Kung Fu, Bagua, China. So I trained in many different martial arts forms. And I would say my expertise most The expertise I hold is in Kyokushinkai Karate and Aikijitsu. And every martial artist teacher I had, Sifu or Sensei, always told me their style was the best of all styles. And their students, like parrots, I guess except for one Sifu and Sensei I had, as I mentioned, parroted the same false beliefs. So when I was training at Aikijitsu, I recall a time a Jiu-Jitsu student came into our dojo proclaiming that Jiu-Jitsu could defeat Aikijitsu as it was the best of all styles, martial arts styles. So I conferred with another fellow student and said, hey, let's spar this guy. Because on Friday he's going to come back. Friday we spar every Friday. And let's teach him he's wrong. So at first, when the guy came back on Friday, we said, hey, let's spar. Because like we asked our teacher, hey, can we spar this guy just so we could prove his point wrong? And like 2-on-1. The jiu-jitsu guy said, hey, that's not fair. I'll spar you 1-on-1. I'll prove the superiority of martial arts form on 1-on-1. But we replied, hey, jiu-jitsu is the best martial arts in the world. What kind of martial arts form can you claim to be the best, most superior art form in the world if you can't handle two people? Is that what you're going to do if two people attack you in real life? Say, hey, stop. Hey, can you line up and let me fight you 1-on-1? Because 2 against 1 is not fair. You can't say that. So if you're going to say it's the most superior, you should be able to fight both of us at the same time. So finally, we got the jiu-jitsu practitioner to agree to spar with both of us. And our strategy was simple. We spoke amongst each other, like me and the other guy in the Aikijitsu class. We say, hey, one of us is going to always stay out of his reach and let the other guy either try to take us down or we'll shoot him and try to take us down. We're just going to tie him up. And we'll simply work, once we go to the ground, on trapping his hands, arms, and legs as much as possible. So even if his ground fighting skills were far superior to ours, which it probably would have been, we didn't really know what his ranking was, but if he was a black belt, they would have been far superior to ours at the time. I said, just, tie him up so he doesn't choke us out right away. And as it turned out, my partner was taken out by the jiu-jitsu practitioner. And when my partner tied him up, I took out a tanto, which is a short wooden knife that I hid in my gi, and using the blunt end instead of the sharp end, I simulated a couple stabs on the jiu-jitsu practitioner. And then I said, hey, so now stop. And the jiu-jitsu guy said, why? I said, because I just stabbed you 2 times, both of which were fatal insertion points. So if you understand anything about anatomy and you understand about knife fighting, which you apparently don't, if you're taken to a hospital, if this were a real life fight, even if you're taken into a hospital in 5 minutes, you still might be dead. So the jiu-jitsu practitioner responded, hey, it's not fair because he didn't know I had a weapon, which I responded. So you think in a real life situation, the bad guys are going to announce to you that they have a weapon before using it on you. You said your martial arts form is far superior to ours. So how, this in a street fight, anything is fair. So I said, okay. I even rolled back my conclusion. I said, hey, okay, let's go back. We'll fight 2-on-1, and I promise you, I'll just fight open hands, no weapons. So again, the jiu-jitsu practitioner took down my partner. I stayed out of reach, and after both were entangled on the floor, I simulated a couple soccer kicks and head stomps to his head. And so again, I said, stop, because you will already have been unconscious if this were a real life situation. After which the jiu-jitsu practitioner finally came to his senses and realized the ineffectiveness of jiu-jitsu against multiple attackers, and realized that if we were going to fight 2 or more people, it would behoove him to stay on his feet, not to go to the ground, and that he would have to gain the competency to defend himself with stand-up skills against more than one attacker. So in so many instances, we're constantly lied to without realizing it, because we do not receive the proper critical thinking skill development when we're younger to spot fraudulent beliefs that we embrace as truths. So for those that graduated with PhDs in economics and MBAs that continue to believe a lot of the fraud that was passed on as truth inside these academic classrooms, I understand the inability to speak out until we resolve these delusions we are taught with the reality by which the real financial world operates. However, for those that understand or are even beginning the process of understanding how this world operates, yet still continue to remain silent, I have less tolerance, because if you are someone that wants to create a better future than the one that will be created, if we stay on this current path that the powers that be are taking us down, which I assume you are if you're still watching or listening to this podcast at minute number 44, then you must practice love and speak out. You can't practice fear. Many of the truths that are known today in the world of money and finance are only known because of those of us that were willing to speak out and suffer the negative consequences of doing so. Like, I started out this article by stating that the community of the honorable can defeat the community of the dishonorable because we outweigh them by millions to one, by hundreds of millions to one. However, I also stated that this cannot happen if we remain silent and we don't speak out, because the fact that we outweigh the dishonorable by many millions to one is absolutely meaningless if only a few among us are willing to speak out. So under the current situation we have among those with voices, the dishonorable are far outweighing us. So as far as action is concerned. So the honorable are destined, we the honorable are destined for defeat unless we unite and find protection in our unity. So the powers that be will continue to tell us that fear is stronger than love. I'm sure many of you listening to this have heard that, right? Fear is more powerful than love. We hear despotic rulers in history state that they would rather have people fear them than love them, because they say there's much more control through fear than love. But it's been proven, it has been proven that fear elevates cortisol levels, right? This is like a hormone that creates more stress, it breaks down our immune systems, and serves as another layer of proof that the worldwide government lockdown response to this viral pandemic was not done in our best interest, because, even in the best interest of the vulnerable and the elderly, because increased stress, which definitely resulted from the lockdown, destroys our immune systems instead of strengthening them. And if fear is stronger than love, which I completely reject as a falsehood, then tell me, how did Gandhi free India from 89 years of colonial British oppression in 1947 by preaching nonviolence and love? How did Bob Marley bring two opposition party leaders that hated each other in the middle of a civil war in Jamaica on stage and have them shake hands on April 22nd, 1978 in a concert appropriately dubbed the One Love Peace Concert? And incidentally, just 2 years prior to that concert in 1976, Bob Marley took to the stage just 2 days after suffering injury from an assassination attempt by people that wanted to fracture instead of unite Jamaica. And in the course of this assassination attempt, 83 bullets were fired into Bob Marley's house, one that grazed his chest and lodged in his arm. And when he was asked why he would go through with a concert just 2 days after he almost died, you know what Robert Nesta Marley stated? He stated, quote, "The people who are trying to make this world worse aren't taking a day off. How can I?" So I urge all of us to adopt Bob Marley's mentality. That the people that are trying to make the world worse, and they are right now not taking a day off, how can we, by exercising self-censorship and stitching our own mouths shut instead of speaking up? So in conclusion, I believe that love is a much more powerful force than fear, that we are taught the exact opposite. Furthermore, by most of us continuing to live in fear, refusing to comment on YouTube videos, even though we want to, by refusing to practice the power of numbers and community, and instead resorting to self-censorship and self-defeating practices like that, we continue to be our own worst enemies, causing our energies to vibrate at the lowest frequencies possible that give rise to stress, a lack of self-awareness, a lack of self-confidence, a lack of mindfulness that leaves our potential remaining untapped. So I believe that love is the binding force that gives strength to the paradigm of strength in numbers. And that for those of us that continue to live in fear, if we feed into the negative energy that gives parasites strength over us, we are destined to fail in our bid to make this world a better place for our children, if we have young children now, or for, even for future generations. Every single generation, if we fail to speak out now, will have a worse quality of life, I guarantee you. So many of the issues of which I've spoken about, that many of you have been learning for the first time on my new SK Wealth Academy podcast channel, I've been speaking of for well over a decade. And I know some of you know this because some of you have mentioned in recent comments on my videos that you've been following me for more than a decade. And though the decoupling of paper and real physical gold and silver prices has become a hot topic in the past few months, I spoke about this topic and put my company in serious jeopardy, the viability of my company, by publicly speaking about this 12 years ago when the decoupling of paper and real physical gold and silver prices appeared during the 2008 global financial crisis. And I went to the very top. Because I reported this to commissioners at the U.S. Commodities and Futures Trading Commission. If you didn't watch that prior podcast I posted on this channel, I let you know they responded to me within 15 minutes of receiving my email. So I knew they already knew about me. Otherwise, why would they respond so quickly? I was already on the radar for speaking about issues like this, even though nobody knew who I was back then. So my relentless pursuit of truth in the financial markets eventually led to the destruction of my first company, because all major social media platforms relentlessly shadow banned, censored, and demonetized all my content for speaking about this on years after year after year. And there were even actually hedge fund managers that acknowledged exactly what I stated in my communication with that CFTC commissioner, but said in so many words, because they wouldn't explain and give credence to exactly what I said, because they said something like, they left it very opaque, saying that we understand that bankers manufactured this plunge in gold and silver prices, and it was all so clever of them to do it. And that's all they said, because you know why they wouldn't go any further than that? Because if they actually discussed the mechanisms by which they did it, which I did back then they knew people would falsely label them as a conspiracy theorist, and they would likely have lost 30 to 50% of their business revenues by doing so. So to suppress truth in the pursuit of profits, they refused to do so. So I'm not saying that, I'm not discussing the situation because I want any empathy for anyone, but I'm only saying it to explain that I, of all people, understand the risks of speaking your mind. So at the time, I was given a choice of shutting up about the truth and having my business, because my business was humming. It was humming back then. If you look for all the search engine optimization phrases that for my company that I chose to optimize my business, I was showing up ranking number 3, 4, and 5 out of like 55 million results for those search terms on Google. And Google eventually pushed my company down. Even though I was releasing more and more content about gold and silver, they pushed my company back to the 6th page, and they effectively destroyed my business. And that's why I had to make the decision to shut it down, because I couldn't make any more money off of it. So I know of the risks, right, we have of speaking up. But yet, if we give in to fear, then we are just going to do exactly what the powers that be want us to do. So, I would like to think that many of you listening to this podcast understand a lot more about the delusions that exist in the global financial markets today because of my 15-year willingness to always speak the truth about what I learned and observed in financial markets. I would like to think that those that write articles about similar topics I addressed 12, 13, 14 years ago, when literally only a handful of people around the world were writing about such topics, such as banker manipulation of gold prices for fear that writing about these topics would kill their businesses. I would like to think that the people that write about these topics today were perhaps encouraged to start speaking publicly about these issues because I never succumbed to the fear of writing about the truth because of the negative consequences and the blowback of doing so. So I guarantee you, if I started in a new island nation that was entirely cut off from the internet, radio and television programming, that infiltrates the rest of the world, but still have all the other technology that exists in the world today. And even, of course, music, they have musical instruments, film and news industries that are organically grown from the ground up without any pre-existing agendas or biases from the few puppet masters that control the biases of all these industries. That the people of this island nation, if exposed for the first time to the rest of the world's, meaning our belief system at age 21, will believe the rest of us to be mentally insane regarding our belief system and how we came to formulate our belief systems from predominantly parroted, adopted beliefs of others with virtually no learning process to formulate our closely held beliefs today. So do you agree? Tell me, because remember I say we end every podcast with one question. Do you agree with me that this would be the result of an isolated island nation? One even that consisted of millions of people. If such a case actually happened in the real world? And why or why not? And then finally, let me leave you with the wisdom of Bruce Lee. Because Bruce Lee, in his seminal book, The Tao of Jeet Kune Do, stated, quote, "When one is not expressing himself, he is not free. Thus, he begins to struggle, and the struggle breeds methodical routine. Soon, he is doing his methodical routine as response, rather than responding to what is." Now, let me interrupt this by also saying, for those of you that love to say it is what it is, Bruce Lee was probably the first person to say that, because in the Tao of Jeet Kune Do, he said, "What is." So when we say it is what it is, that's just an iteration of Bruce Lee philosophy, because the Tao of Jeet Kune Do came out, in the 50s or 60s, a long time ago. Okay, let me continue with this quote. "The fighter is always to be single-minded with one object in view. To fight looking neither backward or sideways. He must get rid of obstructions to his forward movement emotionally, physically, or intellectually," end quote. So I believe there is a warrior in all of us. We just need to stop self-censoring ourselves to find it. So take up the fight starting today. Because like Bruce Lee, I believe if we do not express ourselves, we are not free. We cannot claim we are free. So fight and stop moving sideways. Stop moving backwards. Stop running in place in quicksand. Fight. And even if our legs become heavy and weary, we will at least know we are moving forward. Express yourself and freedom will come. Silence yourself and forever sentence yourself to a life of mental inferiority. So all martial artists will understand how I'm going to end this podcast. And it's a particularly apropos ending for this podcast. So if you don't understand the ending, you can look it up on the internet. As always, thanks so much for watching. Please comment on my question. Please like, and please subscribe, because all those things help to forward my message. And if you believe my message to be important, it will help my message to grow and to be seen by more people. And as always, remain intensely curious. Os.